Hello and welcome to the Neev Virtual Book Club. My name is Karthika. I'm the head of reading at Neev Academy. Through this module, what we'd like to do is we'd like to introduce you to some of the best Indian children's books that have come out in the past year. Today, we're going to be looking at a middle grade novel called The Bridge Home, written by Padma Venkataraman and published by Penguin Random House. The Bridge Home tells us the story of two sisters, 11-year-old Viji and her older sister Ruku, who has a developmental disorder. Both of them come from a home where their mother is very loving but is unable to stand up to the abuse meted out by their father. Viji decides that it would be better for both sisters to take their chances at a life away from home. They run away and escape to the streets of Chennai. With no guardian, no one to look after them, no money saved up, both girls end up forging a life on the streets with the help of two boys, Arul and Muthu, who are veterans, hardened by their life on the streets. The gang of four is joined by a stray dog named Kutti, who makes up the complete pack. All four of them eke out a living by scavenging in the garbage mounds of Chennai. They end up living rough. They end up living on a bridge, an abandoned bridge by the side of the road, which is one reason why the book is so named, but also because of all the other layers that the story presents. The author Padma Venkataraman had traveled back to her childhood to be able to write this book. Her mother used to work with children in vulnerable situations, hailing from socially disadvantaged groups. And a lot of that is evident in the writing itself. The fact that these are encounters that the writer has had with children from these circumstances. These are encounters based on friendships that she's forged with children from difficult circumstances, makes its presence felt through every page of the book. And in the bridge home, what we're confronted with is the reality that a lot of children in our country face every day. What are the circumstances that led them to a life on the streets? What are the decisions that they're faced with every day? What is the price of freedom? What is it that we truly gain? What is it that we lose in the process? There are a lot of questions that come up as we're reading the book. The author has put out a lot of resources that she's collected, collated, curated on her website, on her blog. She's created a Padlet that helps readers understand these situations better and understand the characters better. She's also posed a lot of questions and answered a lot of questions that were put to her during the global read aloud that the book was chosen for. And through it, we learn more about her process, her writing, about the fact that a lot of the characters' names are based on real life people that the author has known and loved in her life. We had a few more questions for Padma, so we decided to set up an interview with her, a Q&A. And let's hear from her now. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
All right. So, how are you feeling today?
Pretty good personally, but there's so much strangeness going on in the world, no?
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. I
Yeah.
was actually thinking about that in the context of the bridge home. Um,
Yeah.
that we live in these increasingly insular cultures and ways of thinking. That it's so nice that there are books like the bridge home which will help children sort of break free and see what the other side is like and try and connect with lives that are so different from their own. It's so important for
Right.
books like that.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
I think one of the things, that I feel quite bad about in India, even today when you go into a bookshop, you see so many books, written by, let's be frank, you see a lot of books written by white authors.
Right.
And that really upsets me. We have so many people, I mean, Neev knows all about that, Parodat and all of these other people who are writing excellent books in India have been doing that, for a long time.
Right.
And I just think, we need to change that.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. On that note, then, shall we move into the questions, Padma?
Yes, of course.
All right. Okay.
I just gave them very cursory thought because you told me that you wanted me to be spontaneous.
Right. Okay, great. Fair enough. All right. So let me start with the first question, which actually struck me while I was going through all of the material on your website. And I was looking at the questions that children have asked you and how you've responded to them. And they've made so many connections that you don't anticipate. I mean, you might think of a few questions that readers might possibly come up with, but there were some questions that sort of took you by surprise. For instance, when we were doing the book at Neev, and I know we did it with grade 7 students, there was a child who said that I loved the book and I connected to it because of the story of Kutti. And Kutti really brought that book alive for her. And I know that in your website you've talked about, there was a reader called Liz who talked to you and asked you a question about how do you make a character so well defined without having her speak so much, like you've done with Ruku. And then you also had questions and you had feedback from people coming back to you and telling you that the book helped them move from vulnerable situations to safer spaces. So, are there any other connections like that you didn't anticipate readers making, but which sort of caught you by surprise?
I think that was the most amazing thing for me. I mean, I don't think when I wrote it that I was really, for me, it was just keeping a promise that I gave, a long time ago.
Right,
And I didn't really even realize that. Frankly, I didn't even realize that when I was writing. Only when I was revising did I really come to terms with that. I think the most amazing thing to me and the biggest gift I could ever have, Kartika, is that fact that some children and some adults moved to better situations when they read the book
right,
and they felt that connection. One other connection that I think was important for me is that when I go and speak at schools, usually this is what it's also through Ruku. It, all of my books so far have somebody with a disability,
right,
and it's because I have one too, and we don't talk about we don't talk about especially anything to do with like mental illness or you know anything that has any kind of taboo, whether it's that or whether it's a developmental disability, especially that we shove it aside a lot.
right,
I think in our culture right now, right, things have always changed. I mean, India has what we have 6,000 so many years of culture, but
right,
things change. But right now it's not, it's not very open
right,
in some ways, and I think that's very important. So when I say, look, I deal with anxiety and I deal with depression, and so maybe because of that and because of the fact that there are people in my family with disabilities. One of
right.
my aunts actually has polio, so she's a polio survivor,
Okay,
and she is like the most active of all of my aunts. When they're all sitting around chatting, she's the one who's always playing with the kids.
right,
But to me, I think that was a very important thing to be able to say. And listen, it took me 40 years. Okay, I didn't start off by being able to say these things, that
right,
I have trauma in from my childhood. Who knows what caused what, the issues that I deal with, but I
right,
have to think about my mental health every day.
right,
And it's something that it's a part of my life. I don't feel that it's any, it just makes me different, but all of us are different, right? And so that's something for me. I think that was a connection that's important, and it was really good for me to be able to make that. I think because when I speak about that openly with kids, then maybe they have a relative, or maybe they have a condition themselves, and they're able to then open up, and that's another connection. And especially with Ruku, because so many kids that have a person with a disability in the family,
right,
especially developmental disability, they have that special connection.
right,
And overall in the world, I found through the global read aloud that Roku is like by far everybody's favorite character. It seems, so many people like, I love Roku, and they just love her because I think there's an aspect of childhood in which we don't speak much.
right.
You know, even if we can, we're a little shy or something like that. And I think,
Yes.
in a sense, they maybe that is something that connects them to Ruku as well. And she's so feisty.
Right. Yeah.
She doesn't say much.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Now that you mentioned it, I can see how readers could make that connection. And also it's so evident that, there's so much of you that's in the book. And it's obviously deeply personal to you. So it must feel really fulfilling for you to have it out there. So is that also one of the reasons why I went to your website and I see all of the resources that you've curated. And then you have the Padlet, and then you have the blog, and you've had extensive interactions on it because of the Global Read Aloud. I've not seen a lot of authors put this much depth and go into this much detail about the background and the setting and the characters of a book. So was this what drove it? The fact that it was a labor of love, or the fact that it's just something that you felt that you wanted to put out there to clarify nuances that you think that people might not get otherwise? What was it?
I think a bit of both. You've touched on both things. I mean, for me, it was a very personal book. Again, it took me a long time. It's my fourth novel.
Right.
So, and I think that was part of it. And part of it was also being able to, at this stage, speak openly about some things. Because the other thing that we don't really address is how there's a lot of gender bias.
Right.
And when I was growing up, there was a lot of gender bias also.
Yes.
Even within my family, there was gender bias. And people will not speak about that, and they don't like to hear that. But there are still practices that we continue that are constantly, reinforcing this idea that somehow women are not okay. And I've come across books, sometimes written, from people within the culture, trying to be very nice and trying to be open about ideas, and yet being parochial, and it incenses me sometimes. How much of this is insidious, how much of this is inside, and we don't even examine it.
Right.
And I remember, for instance, there was maybe I'm going into this in too much detail, but you can edit it later if you like. But there was a magazine that I used to write for, and there was at one point there was a folk tale, and a wonderful young woman, was the editor of this folk tale, of this magazine, so committed and everything. There was a folktale about a man hitting a woman on one cheek and then hitting her on the other cheek. Some rubbish about some laddu, blah, blah. Her cheeks were swollen like this. I was so angry. I wrote to that person and I said, I will never write for you again if you ever do this again. And you know something? She wrote me such a lovely letter. She's one of my best friends today. She said, I took that for granted. I didn't even examine it because that story was told to me that way. That's why I want you to continue writing for our children. And I think, I make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes.
Right.
And, at that time I was young, so I said it maybe very forcefully to her. But I think I've learned I got some gray hair and I don't dye it. And, I've learned that sometimes now I say things in a different way so that it's received in a better way. And I also realize, when you're young, sometimes you think, you know everything and you don't make any mistakes. And I know that I make a lot of mistakes too. But I think that's very important for us to be open, and for us to learn and grow and change. That's important, And sometimes I think now I have obviously a lot of relatives in India. There's a lot of division and sides being very very much, sort of, let's say, entrenched in some certain views or whatever, and fighting. And I think conversations stop sometimes, and conversations need to happen. Really deep, difficult conversations need to happen.
Right.
Not shut down.
Yeah, fair enough. And I know that there are publishers in India now who are trying to fight this very consciously and try to bring out books that sort of reflect more contemporary attitudes. And therefore, there's a clear sort of breed of new books coming out that are trying to correct these sort of viewpoints. So, in that sense, in the fact that you've written this really brave book, it's set in South India. You've had a chance to interact with readers from around the world about it. Have you also had a chance to meet with young readers or talk to young readers from South India or in Chennai? Because the book is it's closer to the setting of the book. Have you had that at all?
Yeah, I did. And that was, it is so amazing for me because finally this book, thank goodness, Penguin India actually took it up, because for some reason they haven't taken my other books. I wish they would, but they did bring this out. And that was, it was really special. So they sent me on tour. Unfortunately, I fell ill and I couldn't finish the tour. So I wasn't able to meet as many kids, but I had the most amazing, one of the most amazing experiences of my life. There was this young fellow. I want to tell the school, but it's a school in Chennai. I was so impressed by the school. I don't want to name the school in case they get mad at me, but or I'm identifying the child too much. But when I looked, I couldn't tell. I was sitting I could just tell that teacher was a little worried, I think this little lad was a bit of a mischievous fellow, probably.
Okay.
So when he came onto stage, she just said to him before, she said, okay, I'm giving you this chance. You are representing our school. And he said, yes, ma'am. And she asked him, you really read the book or what? And he said, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And, he came up to the stage, and for a young boy in Indian culture, in any culture around the world, frankly, but, for him to stand up at a school in Chennai, which was not like one of the she broad-minded neck, you know what I'm saying? Not,
Right.
okay, I shouldn't say broad-minded. They were very broad-minded, obviously, in that school to have me. But I'm saying like, a school that maybe you would think is like different or open. No, it was a traditional school.
Right.
This young fellow came up and he said, ma'am, your book, when I go out, I see the children out there. I see Ruku and Muthu and Arul and Viji out there, ma'am. I see them now in a way I never saw them before. And he cried on the stage.
Wow.
I will never forget that moment. I will never forget that moment, because you know what? It was amazing. And he said, even on the stage, he said, ma'am, I don't care if anyone teases me now, ma'am. They need to read your book.
Wow.
And I hope nobody will ever tease a child for crying.
Yeah.
I told them all that. I said, if I may not be here, if you ever tease him, you should know my ghost is out there saying boo to you. But, that it made me feel so humble,
Right.
that words could have such a power. And sometimes I don't think the books are mine, like, of course, sometimes I do feel that way, but sometimes I don't, sometimes I really think they come from somewhere else and I'm just here for a little while, right? My books will be there hopefully for longer than I am. I'm not going to, who knows? But I feel so grateful that the words that I was able to write down somehow and had some part in writing down have changed maybe at least a few people's lives a little bit and made them think.
Yeah. And in fact, that's similar feedback that we got from our children also when they were reading the book. And they said that, we would pass these children by at street corners, at traffic signals, and we wouldn't really think about them. But now, when we think about them, we imagine and we think back to Vijay and Ruku and Arul and Muthu, and we pause and we think about what are their lives actually like. And that really, I think, nailed it for all of us who are working with the book. And I'm sure you've experienced this time and again, where it just creates this level of empathy that is unforeseen, which is what we'd like for books to do, and for stories to do for our children. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the coolest things about a book is that, right? So, I think of course, there are books that make you laugh, and those are very important. And entertainment is certainly important. The ability to read, all of that is, or improving your vocabulary, whatever. All of those things are lovely. But I think the most important thing that a book can do is that you open the bridge home, and you're not inside another place and time. You're also inside someone else's head.
Yeah.
Right, and someone else's heart. And I think when you do that, when you experience like how in a way you're experiencing through their body as well, right? If they're scared, your body reacts, right? You feel scared in a way.
Right.
And so I think when you're really into a book like that, it gives you a small, that's not to say that you actually understand, of course not,
Right.
but it helps you to get to that place. It helps you to start to see differently. And I think that's one of the best things that can happen.
Right.
And I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky that in a way, and that these things happened to me that were very unusual in India, and that made me then grow up with these other kids that I did not realize immediately were that different.
Right.
Except perhaps for the fact that I was not teased by them, whereas I was teased by some others. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Okay. On that note of thinking about books and stories, may I ask, you've already mentioned on your blog and your website that you have an affinity for character names that start with V, because it's sort of a tribute to somebody who's very dear to you. So do you have a new book, an idea for a new book? Does it have a character whose name starts with V? And you promised one of your readers that there might be a cameo by someone from the Bridge Home in that book. So I was just wondering if it's gotten that far.
So my aunt Vishalam is the one that, she's a lovely person. So I always think about her. Hope she's watching now from wherever she is up above. But so, yeah, I am thinking about a book, and I need all of your blessings, Kartika, and everybody else in India and everywhere all around the world, that it will happen. So actually today, in a few hours, I'm going to talk to my editor about that. And indeed, in actually two of the possible ideas that I have, but they're both up there, the kids will have a cameo appearance.
Ooh,
Yeah, so you
yay.
might get a glimpse of what happens to these kids, but not like in a, not
Right,
too much, but
right.
just
Oh,
appearance.
excellent. Wow, we're already excited.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you so much, Padma. This is lovely. We hope that we'll get to meet you sometime. But thank you so much for taking the time out to do this for us.
See you all.
Hopefully soon. Fingers crossed.